Within the campaigns and discussions around the local elections, there's maybe a much bigger question. Is our country, is our state getting better or is it getting worse? If you look around you, I'm afraid to say there's plenty of evidence that it is less safe, that our country is growing more violence, that there's a lot more inequality. There's also evidence that nothing is being done to hold people accountable when they commit crimes. One person who's been writing about all of this and many other aspects is Professor Raymond Suttner, researcher and analyst. He played his own important role in the struggle for freedom. He joins us now. Professor Suttner, good afternoon to you, sir, and thank you very much indeed for your time. You appear to be suggesting in many ways things are, I suppose the phrase is, falling apart in our country. What do you mean by that?
Well, there is legitimacy and there is authority. And authority seems to be recognition of the right of some people that they happen. Now, as you said, a lot of things are not happening at the moment, not just load shedding. People commit criminal acts with impunity. There's a lack of credibility. For example, this report that I just heard now about the truck drivers, I wonder if one probes it further, whether there's not more to this story, in the sense that xenophobic discourse is sometimes manufactured for various reasons. So I wouldn't have been as skeptical as I am now about official statements. But I think we've learned over the last decades that there's a lot of things that are being said at the level of state leadership that are proven later to have been ill-founded or not properly prepared. And what I fear is that there were a lot of gains that were made in the early years with water, electricity, etc. And I think some of these have actually eroded through inadequate planning, through chasing numbers, saying we've built so many this, so many that, and in fact not doing it. But I think more seriously is that there's an institutional dysfunctionality, that a number of institutions, some people are even suggesting at the level of the courts, are not functioning adequately. I mean, the Constitutional Court has got almost 50% of its appointments are acting appointments. And how has this been allowed to happen? So there are a lot of reasons, but I don't want to pretend that I have got a definitive analysis. I'm just grappling, trying to understand and trying to characterize what's going on.
I mean, I suppose in a way, I mean, what we see perhaps is that you have a weakness of the state in so many ways. The court is a good example. The courts are a good example. You could suggest perhaps, and you do suggest, that infighting in the police is another example. I mean, and this all has knock-on effects. If there's infighting in the police and people know about it, and I mean, it's obvious, the police have less legitimacy. Police use violence against communities. Communities feel they can use violence against the police in return.
Yes. You see, legitimacy is a moral quality almost, but authority is a capacity to have your instructions carried out. And I think what we're seeing, in addition to a delegitimization, is that there's a loss of state capacity because it no longer, its authority is not recognized. Its writ doesn't run throughout the country. And the police services seem to be paralyzed. So many people who are redeployed or shuffled around or dismissed and all this sort of thing, and the person who's doing it, the head of the police services himself, having to account to the president as to why he shouldn't be dismissed. So I think it's, you know, the elections are happening in an atmosphere of unprecedented cynicism. I think there was cynicism in 2016 and 2019, but I think it's much higher now. This man, De Ruyter, who runs Eskom, I believe from what I can see, he's acting in good faith. But people are just fed up. They are not really willing to hear the constraints and all of this, which happened before this man came there. And it does seem things are getting worse. And I don't know that it helps when, for electioneering purposes, the president promises to fix one part of Soweto. I mean, that is not really, it actually increases people's cynicism.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the president, and he is the head of state. In a way, there's a sort of responsibility on his shoulders. Do you think he could act a lot more than he is? And I mean, the classic example, which, I mean, maybe is not so relevant anymore, is around the correctional services head. I mean, Arthur Fraser, who we know has been implicated in all sorts of things. I mean, he denies what he's been implicated in the State Security Agency, but it was just, redeployed, allowed to finish his contract, not removed. I mean, there are plenty of other examples. I mean, is it the president's, fault? Maybe fault's the wrong word. Is it the president's responsibility to rebuild the state?
Well, what I would ask is if he wanted to have an executive that could carry out the reconstruction of South Africa after the Zuma years, why has he kept so many of these duds from that period? They're not just collaborators with Zumaism. They were actually people who were non-performers, who are in many important positions. And there's no sign that they're going to be cleaned out. And when someone gets found to have performed inadequately, they just simply get moved somewhere else. And I just think that the president may be preoccupied with remaining president. But what is the content of the presidency? What is it that is being achieved other than his remaining in the office? Because that's what matters to us as inhabitants of South Africa. And I fear that a lot of very unfortunate things have happened and the president has been missing in action. No, I don't want to put everything on the president's shoulder, but I think it's very important that he is actually responsible for the people who should have taken steps after this July rising, or whatever one calls it. And how is it that people can get into the St. George's Hotel and hold 3 cabinet ministers hostage? And a lot of these people who are claimed to be veterans have got serious criminal records, not just a traffic fine or something like that. So I don't want to be Ramaphosa bashing every time I write or speak, but the problem is that the man is